The last time you were truly angry, you were wrong about why. You thought you knew. You thought it was about what they said, what they did, how they looked at you. But it wasn't. It was never about them. And somewhere underneath the noise, underneath the heat in your chest and the tightness in your jaw, there was something quieter, something older, something you've been carrying so long you forgot it was there. Freud said anger is never the real emotion. It's always a cover story. And the thing it's covering is the thing you're most afraid to feel. Think about the last argument you had. Not a disagreement, a real argument. The kind where your voice changed, where you could feel your heart beat in your throat, where you said something you didn't mean, or maybe you meant it more than anything you've ever said, and that's what scared you. The kind where you walked away and spent the next hour rehearsing better versions of what you should have said. Now think about what triggered it. It was something small, wasn't it? It's almost always something small. A tone of voice, a forgotten errand, a text that took too long, a look that lasted 1 second too short. The trigger was tiny, but the explosion wasn't. And that gap, that enormous gap between the size of the trigger and the size of the reaction, is where the truth lives. Freud would look at that gap and say everything you need to know about yourself is hiding inside it. In 1917, Freud was treating a man who developed an intense, irrational hatred for his younger colleague at work. The man couldn't explain it. The colleague hadn't done anything offensive. He was polite, competent, unremarkable. But every time the man saw him, he felt a surge of fury so intense it frightened him. He fantasized about humiliating the colleague in front of others. He lay awake at night, composing devastating insults he would never deliver. The hatred consumed him. Freud listened for weeks. And then he asked a question that changed the direction of the entire analysis. He asked the man to describe his younger brother. The room went silent. The man hadn't mentioned his brother once in months of sessions. But as he began to speak, everything unraveled. His younger brother had been their mother's favorite, the golden child, the one who received praise effortlessly, while the man worked twice as hard for half the acknowledgement. He remembered specific moments with surgical clarity. A school report card where he brought home top marks, and his mother glanced at it and said, "That's nice." A week later, his brother brought home average grades, and their mother threw a celebration. He remembered standing in the hallway listening to the laughter and feeling something crack inside his chest. He was 8 years old. He didn't have a word for what he felt. He just knew he wasn't allowed to feel it, because good boys don't resent their brothers, and good sons don't question their mothers. So the jealousy went underground, it went into the basement, and it stayed there for 30 years. And then a younger colleague arrived at work and received easy praise from the boss, and the basement door flew open. The rage wasn't about the colleague. It was never about the colleague. It was about a boy standing in a hallway listening to applause that wasn't for him and wondering why he wasn't enough. That is displacement. The emotion is real. The target is wrong. And you do this every single day. You sit in traffic and you grip the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white, and you tell yourself you're angry at the traffic. You're not angry at the traffic. Traffic is a fact. Facts don't make people angry. Interpretations make people angry. You're angry because the traffic is making you late, and being late means losing control. And losing control reminds you of every time something important slipped through your fingers and you couldn't stop it. The traffic isn't the problem. The traffic is the screen onto which your projector is casting a much older film. You snap at your partner over something trivial, and you tell yourself they deserved it because they should know better by now. But the fury in your voice doesn't match the crime. Leaving a cabinet door open doesn't warrant that level of rage. Something else is using that moment as an exit. Some feeling that has been pressing against the walls all day, all week, all year. And the cabinet door was simply the crack it found, and your partner stands there trying to understand how a piece of wood on a hinge became the reason the room is on fire, they will never understand, because it was never about the cabinet. It was about something neither of you can see. Freud made a claim that most people resist when they first hear it. He said anger is always a secondary emotion. Always. It is never the first thing you feel. It is the thing your mind sends to the surface to protect you from feeling the first thing. And the first thing is almost always one of three emotions that the ego considers too dangerous to experience directly. The first is pain. Not physical pain, emotional pain. The raw, exposed feeling of being hurt by someone who matters to you, a friend who excluded you, a parent who dismissed you, a partner who looked at you like you were invisible. The pain arrives first, for a fraction of a second, and then anger rushes in like a bodyguard, shielding you from the vulnerability, because pain requires you to admit that someone had the power to wound you, and admitting that feels like weakness. Anger doesn't feel like weakness. Anger feels like strength. That's why your ego prefers it. The second is fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of being exposed as inadequate, fear that the thing you're pretending to have under control is actually falling apart. When you yell at your child for running near the street, you call it anger, but Freud would call it terror. You just watched the person you love most in the world come close to being taken from you, and the fear was so overwhelming that your ego instantly converted it into something more manageable. You were never angry at the child. You were drowning in the possibility of losing them, and because fear makes you feel powerless, and anger makes you feel powerful, the conversion happens in a heartbeat. You grab them by the arm, and you shout and they cry, and you tell yourself you're teaching them a lesson. But the lesson you're really teaching them is that love sounds like shouting, and that's a lesson they'll carry into every relationship they ever have. The third is grief. Not just grief for the dead, but grief for the unlived. Grief for the version of your life that didn't happen. Grief for the relationship that could have worked but didn't. Grief for the person you were before something broke you. Grief for the parent you needed and never had. This is the one people resist most because grief requires acceptance, and acceptance feels like giving up. It feels like admitting that something is gone and it's not coming back. So the ego sends anger instead. You're not sad that the relationship ended. You're furious at them for wasting your time. You're not grieving the career you didn't pursue. You're bitter at the system for holding you back. The anger gives you a target. Grief has no target. It just sits in your chest like a stone, and that's what makes it unbearable. Because you can fight a target, you can't fight a stone. You can only carry it, or you can finally set it down. Think about the angriest you've ever been. Go there. Now peel the anger back like a label on a bottle. What's underneath it? Was it pain? Was it fear? Was it grief? You might not be able to answer that right now. The ego is very good at keeping you on the surface. But the question is worth sitting with. Here's what makes this more complicated. The targets of displacement aren't random. Freud noticed that people almost always redirect their anger towards someone who is safe. Not safe in the sense of harmless, but safe in the sense that the relationship can survive it. You don't scream at your boss because your boss can fire you. You don't rage at the friend who betrayed you because confronting them means risking the friendship. Instead, you bring the fury home. You deposit it on the kitchen counter like a briefcase full of explosives, and you wait for someone you love to accidentally bump into it. Your partner absorbs it. Your children absorb it. Your body absorbs it. And none of them know why the room just caught fire because the match was lit somewhere else entirely. There's a reason Freud called this a compulsion. You don't choose to do it. The displacement happens faster than conscious thought. By the time you realize you're angry, the anger has already found its target. You are reacting to a script written before you had the ability to edit it. The question isn't whether you displace your anger. You do. Everyone does. The question is who wrote the script, and what emotion is the anger protecting you from? One of the most disturbing patterns Freud observed was anger directed inward. When the ego can't find an external target, when every available person is either too powerful to confront or too beloved to attack, the anger turns on the only remaining option, you. This is the root of what Freud called melancholia, which we now know as depression. The rage that should have been directed at someone else gets swallowed. It becomes self-criticism, self-punishment, the voice that says you're not good enough, you don't deserve happiness, everything is your fault. That voice isn't telling the truth. It's displaced anger wearing a disguise. You are attacking yourself because the real target is someone you can't afford to be angry at. Think about that for a moment. Some of the harshest things you've ever said to yourself, the cruelest judgments, the most devastating conclusions about your own worth, those might not be insights, they might be misdirected rage. Every time you tell yourself you're a failure, you might actually be saying, I'm furious at someone who failed me, but I can't say it out loud, so I'm saying it to myself instead. Depression isn't always sadness. Sometimes depression is anger with nowhere to go. Think about your inner critic for a moment. The voice that judges you hardest. The one that finds your flaws before anyone else can. The one that whispers you're going to fail before you even begin. Now ask yourself, whose voice is it really? Because Freud would tell you it's not yours. It's a borrowed voice. It belongs to someone from your past who made you feel small, and instead of being angry at them, you internalized their judgment and made it your own. You're not criticizing yourself. You're letting someone else criticize you from inside your own head. And you've been doing it so long you think it's your voice. You defend it. You say, I'm just being realistic. I'm just holding myself accountable. But Freud would say no. You're being punished by someone who isn't even in the room anymore. By someone who may not even remember saying the thing that taught you to speak to yourself this way. Modern neuroscience supports this framework in striking detail. Brain imaging studies show that when people experience anger, the amygdala activates before the prefrontal cortex. The emotional brain fires first. The rational brain arrives second. By the time you're aware of being angry, the emotion has already chosen its direction. And fMRI studies have shown that in people who suppress primary emotions like grief or fear, the neural pathways for anger become disproportionately developed. The brain literally builds a highway for anger because it's the only emotion you allow yourself to use. Every other feeling takes the back roads, arriving late if it arrives at all. Your brain has been rewired by years of avoidance to default to anger the way a river defaults to the path of least resistance. The other emotions still exist, they're still flowing, but anger carved the deepest channel a long time ago, and now everything runs through it. This is why you can feel furious and not know why. This is why certain people trigger you disproportionately. This is why the same argument happens in every relationship you've ever been in. Different words, same fire. The anger is old. The anger is borrowed. The anger is a messenger, and you keep shooting it instead of reading the message. So what does Freud want you to do with this? Not suppress the anger. He was very clear about that. Suppressed anger doesn't dissipate. It metastasizes. It becomes headaches, stomach problems, insomnia, depression. The anger has to go somewhere. The question is whether it goes where it belongs. Next time you feel angry, before you speak, before you react, before you slam the door, or send a text, or say the thing you'll spend 3 days regretting, pause just for a moment and ask yourself 2 questions. Is this anger the right size for this situation? If the answer is no, if the reaction is bigger than the trigger, then you're not reacting to what's happening now. You're reacting to something that happened before, something unfinished, something that's been waiting for a crack to escape through. The second question is harder. What would I feel if I wasn't allowed to feel angry? Sit with that. Don't rush past it. Your ego will try to pull you back to the surface. It will say, this is stupid. I know why I'm angry. It's obvious. That resistance is the defense mechanism doing its job. Push through it. If anger was taken off the table entirely, if you couldn't access it at all, what's left? Is it hurt? Is it fear? Is it the grief of realizing that someone who should have loved you better simply didn't? Is it the shame of needing something you were taught not to need? Whatever that feeling is, that is the real one. That is the one your ego has been hiding behind a wall of fire for years. And that is the one that actually needs your attention, not tomorrow, not in therapy someday, right now, in the silence after the argument, in the stillness after you've slammed the door, in the 3 seconds between the impulse and the action. That's where the truth lives, in the pause. Anger is loud, but the truth is always quiet. Freud believed that the cure for displaced anger isn't less anger, it's more honesty. The moment you can say, I'm not angry at you, I'm hurt, the displacement loses its power. The moment you can say, I'm not furious at the world, I'm terrified of failing, the anger has nowhere to hide. It doesn't vanish, but it moves from the wrong target to the right one. And for the first time, you have a chance to actually feel what you've been running from, not to act on it, not to explode, just to feel it, to stand in the center of the fire and realize the fire was never coming from outside. It was always yours, and the only person who's been getting burned is you and everyone standing close enough to love you. But anger isn't the only emotion your mind disguises. Sometimes your mind doesn't hide a feeling behind another feeling. Sometimes it hides a feeling behind a habit, behind a craving, behind the thing you reach for every night without thinking. In our next session, we'll talk about why you keep checking your phone and what Freud would say about the addiction you don't think you have. This has been your session on the couch, Freud. If you want to understand what your mind is hiding from you, subscribe. New sessions every day.